It is hard to believe, or perhaps not in the age of Donald Trump, but breast milk has become a political issue. At the World Health Assembly, the US opposed a resolution promoting breastfeeding. The government's bowing to the food industry at the expense of child health. Do infant formula manufacturers have too much power? You're watching Roundtable with me, David Foster. There are many health experts who say breast is best when it comes to feeding your baby, but for some women it's just not that easy, and milk formula is the next best thing. What are the two sides to this argument? Is infant formula on a par with breast milk?
Decades of research show that breastfeeding is crucial for a baby's health. But it's bad for business if you're a part of the $47 billion baby food industry. Are infant formula companies putting profits before health? Do manufacturers have too much power? In May, hundreds of government delegates gathered for the World Health Assembly to approve a resolution encouraging breastfeeding. It also asked countries to limit the misleading marketing of breast milk substitutes. It was reported American delegates wanted to ditch the language that called on governments to protect, promote and support breastfeeding. The Assembly was stunned, with critics certain they were bowing to the American food industry. Annoyed, President Trump tweeted that the US strongly supports breastfeeding, but we don't believe women should be denied access to formula. The infant formula market is mostly controlled by 6 major international companies, which makes political lobbying much easier. And it's worth it. By 2020, the industry is expected to grow 50% with a value of $70 billion. The most growth is expected in developing countries, with $4 to $6 billion spent on advertising. Nestlé advertised some of its products as our closest to breast milk, following the example of breast milk and having an identical structure to breast milk. Health organisations are concerned that a lack of industry regulation is allowing inferior formula and in some cases misleading marketing.
So we don't want to get in the way of the products of infant formula, but the way that they're marketed actually gets in the way for all of those women who can breastfeed.
In the medical world, breastfeeding is best for babies. The World Health Organization estimates that optimal breastfeeding could save the lives of 820,000 children under the age of 5 every year.
Children grow taller. Children are less likely to be overweight and obese later in life. It promotes brain development, but it also protects women's health and the health of mothers.
However, while some mothers choose not to, others are unable. For them, infant formulas are beyond necessary. In developing countries, women buy formula because they've been told it's better than breast milk. But if added to unsafe water, it can increase the risk of infant death. A UNICEF report found more than 1 in 5 babies are never breastfed in high-income countries, whereas 1 in 25 babies are never breastfed in low- and middle-income countries. The infant formula industry is huge in the US and has a lot of political influence. Is more regulation needed around the world to restrict such power? And are parents being given enough information to make the best choice for their children?
Well, I'm very pleased to say that joining me today at the round table we have Alice Delemare, campaigns advisor at Changing Markets. She says her research does suggest that breast milk is better than formula. Patti is with us, policy director at Baby Milk Action, and we have Sabita, Uthaya, consultant in neonatal medicine at the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital. Making up our panel today, Mitch, Blair, Professor of Paediatrics and Child Public Health at Imperial College, London. Now, I mentioned, Patti, this meeting in Geneva, that the Americans suppressed the idea of breastfeeding. You were there. You're going to tell us about that in just a moment. But, Mitch, if I could come to you first. The World Health Organization says 820,000 baby lives a year could be saved by breastfeeding, almost 1 million lives. It is a matter of life or death.
Yes, absolutely. So that's approximately 14% less deaths if there's almost universal breastfeeding.
Why?
Well, the main reasons are primarily reduction in infection risk, particularly respiratory or lung infections and gastrointestinal infections, but also for the very premature babies, the risk of a disease called necrotizing enterocolitis, which can be almost fatal.
That's where it's flesh eating inside your guts.
In a way.
Goodness gracious. Now, you were at this meeting, as I mentioned, Patti. What do you make of the fact that the United States was willing to say we must not promote breastfeeding?
I think they're quite happy to promote breastfeeding. Everybody's happy to promote feeding. All the companies are. What they don't want is a protection against misleading advertising.
Well, that was their excuse, wasn't it? They said, with freedom of speech, people should be allowed to advertise anything they want. But if I can quote Lucy Sullivan, director of 1,000 Days, which works on nutrition for mothers, she said what this business in Geneva showed us is that we have a US government strongly aligned with the interests of the infant formula industry and dairy industry.
And so they always have been since the word go, before the code was there. That was 1981, and we were around at that time. And so we've always known this. But what we're seeing now with the Trump presidency is a really hardline attack on anything that actually limits the marketing of the baby food industry.
But I mean, if we're talking about saving lives, I mean, this is almost criminal, isn't it, to say we're not going to promote breastfeeding?
I think nobody would argue that breastfeeding is best. I think it is extremely important to have the presence of non-government organisations. If you think about it, there's data that suggests that advertising by milk companies in the UK, they spend 10 times as much as the Department of Health.
If we're talking powdered milk.
Yes, we're talking about infant formulas, and the baby industry spends 10 times the amount in the UK on advertising formula than the Department of Health spends promoting breastfeeding. So it is extremely important we have that milk companies are held accountable, and whether that's by non-governmental organisations or by governments themselves. But what we have lacking is not, we have legislation, we have policies, but what we lack is the implementation and the monitoring and enforcement of those legislations.
Alice, you take a look at this, don't you? And you think there's something fishy going on.
Yeah, I mean, what we take a look at in our research is that all the research points to the fact that breast milk is good, better than infant formula in terms of nutrition. But we know that 2 out of 3 babies are currently being fed infant formula or a mixture of breast milk and other foods, such as infant formula. And so in those cases...
This is in the UK or worldwide?
This is worldwide, yeah.
2 out of 3?
Yeah, 2 out of 3 are being fed infant formula or a mixture of breast milk and other foods. And so the reality is that some parents are buying formula. And in that case, manufacturers have a responsibility to provide safe formula as nutritionally complete as possible and based on the best available science that they have. And our research shows that actually it's not based on science. It's being based on marketing considerations of what parents...
So profit making.
Yeah,
rather
this
than
is a
health
hugely
benefits,
profitable industry. It's currently worth $47 billion US. It's projected to go up to $70 billion by 2019.
That's not worldwide, that's just in the US, isn't it?
No, this is worldwide.
47 billion worldwide.
Currently,
okay.
Projected to go up to 70 billion by 2019. It's
and you
very
think the
lucrative.
Advertising is misleading as well? It's downright lies in some cases, because didn't you tell me that one had sugar's bad in this sort of thing, and the other one had sugar added? Or?
So we looked at a couple of things, and we specifically focused on Nestle. They have 1/4 of the market, and we found that in 4 countries that we looked at, so Hong Kong, the US, Switzerland, Spain, they were comparing directly on the tin, they were comparing their formula to breast milk, so closer to breast milk, inspired by breast milk. So that's misleading for a start, because it cannot ever be as good as breast milk nutritionally. And then secondly,
but closer is a funny word as well, isn't it?
Closer is a funny word.
As somebody pointed out, my home near Oxford is closer to Edinburgh than London is
it's
to
misleading.
Edinburgh, but it's not close.
It's misleading.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that we found they were actually contradicting their own nutritional advice. So on a can in Brazil, they said babies should not be fed sucrose, a type of sugar, when they're under 12 months old. It's not good for their health. And then in their products in South Africa, they have sucrose in that product.
Not everybody can breastfeed. So what is wrong with a replacement for it?
So I think the major issue is the difference between breast milk and formula milk. Breast milk, formula milk does contain similar components, but not all. And as science has now developed, we are realizing the huge benefits of this superfood. It is described now as a superfood. So breast milk contains immunological and other hormonal aspects which formula milk would never be able to emulate.
And in fact, there is a market in donor milk, isn't there?
There is indeed, and in some countries, donor milk banks are extremely well developed.
So Cambodian mother, who's still wet nursing, if you like, but doesn't necessarily need all her milk for all her children or the child that she's just had, sells this milk, and it ends up in the UK, or?
Well, no. I mean, just as you're talking about the aggressive marketing of baby milk products, there is also the rise of the commercialization of human donor breast milk. Yeah. And so you're referring to to a particular US company, Ambrosia, that was buying milk from Cambodia for mothers in the US who perhaps weren't able to breastfeed or wanted to top up the breast milk they were giving their babies. And vulnerable women in Cambodia were being paid to paid for their milk.
We don't necessarily know they were vulnerable. It could be that they decided they could make some money out of it.
Sure, but...
and they may have needed the money.
They might have.
Does it mean they're being exploited?
Well, if their babies were then disadvantaged because they weren't giving their babies their milk, then potentially yes.
Okay. What about this film that's doing the rounds at the moment, made by Save the Children, that sort of claims to expose the powdered milk business?
I mean, it's done by Norway. Norway's a very interesting country because Norway was actually not very good on breastfeeding rates until...
This is Norway Save the Children.
Norway Save the Children. Yeah. And the film shows, it's just a Norwegian paediatrician and is going around, and she's going around all different countries. I think it was Cambodia. It's a little bit of time since I've seen it, but just looking at the awful things that the companies are doing, the sponsorship of doctors, and because she's a paediatrician herself in the film, it's lovely the way they've done it, and seeing how mothers are misled by the whole marketing approach. So they look in several countries, I think, but it's quite hard-hitting. And I certainly put it on my blog for that reason. But it doesn't look at actually what's happening in the UK or rich countries. It's tending to assume that everything's okay, because in Norway it is good. They're very good on not having that sort of marketing.
So why do we in this country, this is what I've read, have one of the lowest ages at which mothers stop, of babies at which mothers stop breastfeeding?
I think it's
3 months, isn't it?
It's manifold. I think there are societal reasons, and then there are personal reasons. Personal reasons would be mothers not supported to breastfeed. Increasingly, we're seeing in the UK, in maternity units, mothers are discharged earlier and earlier with their babies, without the necessary support in the community for their babies to continue to establish breastfeeding. Yeah. And
why do you need, sorry, this is a man's question here, isn't it? Why do you need support to continue breastfeeding?
Because there are several reasons why mothers might give up breastfeeding. It could be mothers who feel that their babies aren't getting enough, and perhaps their babies are getting enough. And it's also intervening. It might be babies need a bit of support with supplemental feeding while their mothers are establishing breastfeeding. But it's ensuring that if you want longevity of breastfeeding, then the early days, the early neonatal period, is the time when support can be beneficial.
I sort of went off tangentially there. I had to apologise for that, because your train of thought was, you were leading us into why the UK doesn't encourage mothers to do it.
But there's doubt, isn't there? I mean, there's that doubt that most mothers in the UK tend to say, I'll breastfeed if I can. So already they're coming into a situation, and the corporates have done that very cleverly. They've made you doubt. They've told you that everything's fine, and that actually they really support breastfeeding. But in case you don't, and you'll have sore nipples, and you'll have all these different things. So we're here to support you.
Is this still allowed? When my daughters were born, the marketing companies came in with free gifts of all of this sort of stuff. Is that still allowed?
No. Well, but Bounty's allowed. They are in there, but they're not allowed to put formula.
Not milk.
They're not allowed to put.
Yeah.
They definitely do it in other countries.
And that's the largest market.
Oh, yeah.
And why would hospitals
Allow it.
allow
I
this
think
to
it's
happen?
outrageous.
There must be a reason why. Why, Alice, you're into marketing. Are they in the pockets of the manufacturers? Do they get a new hospital wing built if?
Yeah, there's a lot of incentives as far as we've seen in our research and from a lot of other research that other organisations have done. There are financial incentives, training incentives, you get paid to go to a conference, and in other countries where you're perhaps not paid very well, that's an incentive.
And have you found this? Have you been pressurised?
This is not me personally, but I know that marketing within hospitals and incentivising staff to attend free conferences, etc., is sponsored by companies, is a big issue.
Yeah.
And should that be allowed?
Well, no. The science now is showing very clearly that actually those countries where you have professionals who are being targeted like this are much less likely to be promoting breastfeeding in the same way.
Now let's get on to formula itself. I mean, it doesn't kill babies, does it? But there are dangers associated with it, particularly in developing countries, when they may start to dilute a product, they may use unsafe water, etc. Am I right with that?
Absolutely.
But I mean, when you say it doesn't kill here, it's because we have a healthcare system. And the baby's at risk if it's not being breastfed. I mean, it's not, if you have gastroenteritis or whatever, you've got a healthcare system that's going to pick it up. And if you're far away from that, or if you can't read the instructions, if you can't afford the product.
Well, I suppose what I'm trying to say is this is the least worst alternative, isn't it? Because it keeps babies alive. If somebody who couldn't give them breast milk and they didn't have this, they would die.
Well, there's all sorts of other things. There's wet nursing and there's actually
Well, that's if you've got another spare
sharing.
person around.
Well, they are.
Isn't it?
In emergencies, you do have that, actually. That's what comes forward.
But this is not just about other countries and poorer countries. This is also about there's a lack of regulation. We all assume that this is a highly regulated product, and actually food safety authorities are not checking the nutritional composition of these formulas. And so formula companies are able to just redevelop a product, put another product on an already very saturated market in a lot of different countries, including the UK, including the US, and no one's checking that. The governments are not checking
Danone, the latest Danone one has been on the market for 2 weeks, a month. Babies are getting sick. There's no data sheets for it. I mean, that is outrageous. We've brought in laws through the EU to actually make sure that companies actually notify and tell governments what's in the formula. You don't know what's in it. This is
So it's not on the
outrageous.
can, it's not on the...
It's not enough data. You need more data to know what everything is.
In the sense of like every time you pull an aspirin out of a packet, you get a list that long about what it might be.
I mean, I think we all know
need
that even a healthcare professional reading that information would struggle with
Yeah.
interpreting what
What
means.
is in it.
You have tins saying this is for a hungry baby, you have a tin
Yes.
saying it's for reflux. These are health claims, they're not necessarily claims of what's in the tin. And it's
are they
extremely
wrong?
difficult. Well, they might not be substantiated by the evidence.
Those are
I would
claims-
say they're completely
And,
wrong.
you know, you have
That
based
sounds to
on-
me like another way of saying
Completely
they're
wrong.
wrong.
They're wrong.
They are
But
health
on-
claims. They are health claims based on the concerns of parents that they have done very careful market research into those concerns, and then they develop a product based on those concerns and not necessarily based on the science.
Are you saying that what's happening is immoral? So please,
I'll just give you an example of that, because that's a very good example where parents say, well, we're giving a formula because it helps the baby to settle and it helps the baby to sleep. But when you look carefully at those studies, you find that, yes, there is a reduction in sleeplessness, but it's about 7 minutes.
Yes, I know.
So, it's not a significant
Yeah.
amount.
And it was in the 5th month, wasn't it? So SACN and all the government, advice, so the Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition that's looked at all these things have said, for goodness sake, the government advice is right. The UK policy is right on delaying the introduction, in this case it's of solid foods. But this very bad research is splashed all over the media. And,
On the
my
flip
own...
side, on the
Yes.
flip side, I think while we're talking about the extreme on one end, I think we should also look at the evidence for breast milk and be honest about the evidence for breast milk, because I think there is still work to be done. There is still more research to be done about the optimal duration of breastfeeding. The WHO in 2001 changed its guidance from 4 to 6 months to exclusive breastfeeding for 6 months. And they themselves admit it was done on the basis of very limited evidence. They do suggest that more work is done to look at the sort of optimal duration, especially if you're talking about the third world, where mothers themselves might be malnourished. In the UK, for example, the use of donor breast milk in premature babies, the evidence is still not absolutely conclusive. So I think we do need more evidence on both sides of the argument, and certainly we cannot assume all of the benefits of breast milk have been absolutely established.
Are you suggesting, this is the question for each one of you, all of you, that mothers are being kept in the dark, that they really don't have enough information to make a proper decision?
I would say, having read a very good series in The Lancet 2 years ago, that even some of us have been kept in the dark slightly. If you don't keep up with the science, and it is moving rapidly, and you don't let people know about the science, they're just not going to know. So I think if mothers knew, parents knew, that, you know, breastfeeding would reduce your risk of an ear infection by 40%, or reduce the chance of pneumonia by 30%, that's a huge...
And is that just as a baby, or is that through your life?
As a baby, primarily, yeah.
Some of them are through the life.
And then there are some more life course effects in terms of the possibility of overweight and obesity, cancer risk reduced by 19%, leukemia risk. Now, how many parents know that?
Can I just say, one doesn't associate somebody who provides nutrition for small children to be in the immoral bracket. You might think manufacturers of machine guns, you might think chemical weapons manufacturers fell into that bracket. But what I'm hearing at this table is you think you believe that something immoral is actually happening.
I think that we have come to expect that companies manipulate our emotions to sell products. And if in the case of, I was going to say, like tomato sauce or something to put on your pasta, that might be fine. But when it comes to a product that babies are relying on, a lot of them for their sole nutrition in a very formative stage of life, that's unethical.
I think I think the question is not how we stop formula companies from aggressive marketing. Clearly, they need to be stopped from aggressive marketing. I think if the overall aim is to increase breastfeeding, is to improve our rates of breastfeeding, then we need a range of measures, both at government level, both at societal level, and at the personal level, to increase, to promote, protect, and support breastfeeding.
In terms of the figures, has it got worse since, let's say, the beginning of the 1960s? Or was that a time when it was so new and so exciting?
Pretty bad in the 1960s.
Where do we stand now?
Well, you see, we brought in the World Health Assembly to have a global marketing code was 1981. And the UK, unfortunately, has been in the grip of the corporates from there on in. I mean, it's been a huge struggle to get the UK to do...
But are they increasing their share now, or is it starting to fall off because of the health advice?
There's a saturated market all in these countries where it is really, you know, the baby food companies have taken a grip. And they have got the health... There's masses of money coming in, as Mitch has said, into the training of the healthcare system, health professionals. So we have to de-link that. I'm all for us looking at research, but we must trust, mothers have a right to trust their healthcare professional. And if they find that healthcare professional is being paid in some way by a corporate, I'm sorry, that makes you doubt.
Just a quick one, because we're coming towards the end. If you have the health benefits of breastfeeding being promoted by a particular government, and like in Brazil, we have no advertising allowed for milk formula. Do you think we'll see a shift?
I think it's very interesting that even in America, where there is no code, even in America, the sales are actually predicted to drop slightly. So then you ask yourself, well, what is it that they're doing in that country that is making such a difference? How come they are able to promote breastfeeding, but at the same time be the second largest sales of formula?
And the answer is?
And it's just
parents.
as Sabita said, it's a combination of social movement, political will,
Movement. Yeah,
and appropriate legislation.
yeah.
Okay, and freedom of choice, isn't it? Listen, thank you very much indeed. I mean, it's such a big subject and something that I wish we'd done it before now, but I'm so glad we did turn to this particular one. Yeah, it's a matter of freedom of choice as well, but I think the point being made at the round table is that you need to have better information if you're going to make the right choice about whether to breastfeed or whether to use powdered milk, what they call a formula. It's your choice, but you need to have the information. Thank you all very much indeed. From me, David Foster, from all of us on Roundtable, we hope to have your company next time. You can find us on YouTube Roundtable, TRT World. That's in about 24 hours after the programme goes out, and we like your views. Do leave them there if you can. See you next time. Bye-bye.